This episode of Nurses Saving Nurses is brought to you by Pro Trainings. Pro Trainings offers online, blended, and in-person courses for CPR, first aid, and other required certifications that healthcare providers need. Individuals needing certification can train when and where it's best for them. Businesses who offer training to staff can have a single certification source and easily track their staff certifications without a spreadsheet. Go to protrainings.com to learn more. Welcome to the Nurses Saving Nurses podcast, where we discuss nursing innovation, entrepreneurship, and creative problem solving, addressing some of the issues that exist in our healthcare system. We're focused on solutions, not problems.
All right, welcome everybody to the Nurses Saving Nurses podcast. I'm Nathan Baar, guest host for Adam Mancarelli, and today I am joined by Abigail Nobel, and I will let her give her own introduction. She's had a very amazing healthcare journey and is doing some fantastic work for nurses and healthcare policy in general in the state of Michigan. So Abigail, welcome, and I'll let you dive into a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, Nate. I appreciate you having me here today. I am Abigail Nobel. I was born and raised here in West Michigan and kind of have a farm background, learned a lot of that can-do attitude there. Plus, my parents back in the 70s decided to start homeschooling, and they were at the early part of the wave, and in some ways the parents of a lot of other homeschoolers. And so we learned early on that there were different ways of doing things. If the current system doesn't suit you, then you find a better way. So your theme of entrepreneurship and pushing the envelope to better serve patients really resonated with me. I appreciate your podcast. My nursing career started really young. I was basically born wanting to be a nurse, never really considered anything else, and went to Calvin and was part of the Hope Calvin Department of Nursing back when that program started. I think I was year 2, maybe 3 of the program, and realized in every job I had working through college in healthcare and when I graduated, that every job had all of a sudden something would come down and people would say, well, you can't do it that way anymore. Or you have to change, you have to do the, and I'm like, well, where's that coming from and why? Because it was working perfectly fine. And quite often the new method was more labor intensive or more paperwork intensive. And some of the hospitals I worked at, I think they really had never gotten rid of a single form ever in their entire lives. And so it was everything in duplicate and triplicate, and it all steals time from the patients. And so I always would stuff it back in my mind, you work around these things and you get the patients taken care of. But I always thought somebody needs to do something about that. And so when Obamacare, the ACA, was proposed, I thought, oh boy, this takes care further from the bedside. It's time to do something about this. And so I started, I actually testified in Lansing for the first time when they were proposing the state exchange. And it was a blizzard day in January, I think. And maybe it was December. Anyway, it was the dead of winter, and a bunch of us showed up, and the doctors asked me to sit at their table because they didn't have very many, and they said, bring your white coat. I'm like, okay, this is marketing. This is how we make an impact. This is good. So yeah. And from there, I ended up going to Hillsdale to get my master's in politics in order to explore that intersection of faith, freedom, and practice. By that time I had worked in like 6 or 8 different roles in healthcare as a nurse. I worked surgery, med surg, home care. I taught, and yeah, maybe a little ADD brain there, but I learned a lot in each area, and that each area was, from my perspective as a nurse, overregulated. There were a lot of rules that got in the way of actually giving efficient patient care. So I always sort of question the narrative. I believe we do have a nursing shortage, and there are people who go without care. There's a medical shortage. There's a shortage of PT, O2. I think it's pretty much across the board in healthcare that there are shortages. But part of that is a manufactured shortage. When you spend half your time meeting regulatory requirements instead of doing direct patient care, you're kind of nursing the system instead of nursing the patient. And so I saw state health policy as the sweet spot. And in order to make a difference, we need to understand that more. And so I started a nonprofit called Michigan Healthcare Freedom in 2018 and have been growing ever since. Each year we set ourselves big goals. And so far, we're on track really well for this year. We have wonderful sponsors, and many people individually donate as well to keep us going as a nonprofit. Our mission is really based on the premise that people have a right to understand how state health policy impacts their lives. As professionals, as patients, all the way across the board, for a long time, I would say, and in fact, legislators have told me that the big lobbies run the policy in Lansing.
Yeah.
And I've testified different times, probably the biggest issue that will resonate with nurses is we all know how much the biologics cost our patients, whether they're on insulin or rheumatoid arthritis meds or things for MS. Those meds are the biologics, and being cell-based, they take a lot of research and they have very high costs to manufacture. And so these are the out-of-sight, astronomically expensive meds. Well, as it turns out, those early ones are coming off patent. And the manufacturers try to get, I mean, initially in Congress, 30 odd years ago, they got a longer patent than other chemical-based medications did because of the high challenge, the high cost. They got a 30-year patent. And so they're coming off from those now, and they went back to Congress and tried to re-up those. And Congress said no. So they went out to the individual state capitals and tried to erect market barriers to maintain their market share. And, it really is about the money. When they say follow the money, it has many different trails, but that you do have to follow it. So I went and testified. I can't even remember which year. It might have been 2015. I think it was. Anyway, I put a blog post up on our website, mihealthfreedom.org, and people can find it. It's about the biologics. And they were trying to, you know how with generics, a pharmacist can substitute at will?
Yep.
And if the doctor writes, unless he checks that little box that says dispense as written, the pharmacist can at will give them more affordable medication. And when that happened, when that law passed in Congress, that saved up to 80% of some medications. And they predicted with the biologics that it would probably not save that much, because being a higher price production, not as many will go into competition when it comes off patent, but they thought probably 40 to 60%.
Yeah.
And so the lobbies came to Lansing, and their argument was these are dangerous meds. They really need to have more controls, and you know, they shouldn't be dispensed as at will. It really, you know, and so they have the whole line. And what do legislators know? There are very few of them that were even in healthcare, much less understand these ramifications of these different, and when they're being told a line, frankly. And so, I was able to testify on that one, and I stopped the bill for that term. And so that really showed me, I mean, that felt great to be able to make that kind of impact. Unfortunately, they came back the next term. And there were a lot of new legislators. And there was one who spoke up in committee and said, you know, we heard about this last term, and they were not able to stop it at that point. And it was then that I thought, you know, we're hamstrung by having a legislature that is term limited. Because the knowledge doesn't build up in the legislative class. It builds up amongst the staff, because the staff are not term limited.
I think I heard too recently on term limits for them. There was some legislators I was speaking with, and one of the most senior ranking ones was there for 4 years, and then they start getting through, and so they said they're having session, and there's a lot of people who haven't been through in that legislative body just the basics of how politics works, and so they're trying to survive, let alone fight these very complex issues that have been brewing for a very long time. And experts like yourself who have that context can then help advocate and lobby for these things, because they're wildly complicated. I think that's one of the things I realized too is, you mentioned there's so much as a bedside nurse that you see, but and maybe you can do some small tests of change, but to actually affect a larger scale change, it's got to be at a higher level, and it's really got to be on that legislative side where you're seeing mass influence over a system versus just these smaller incremental changes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so my thought is, I could go live in Lansing and talk to every new class and, and teach just nonstop all day, every day. I don't think that's much of a life.
Yeah.
I believe in a citizen legislature, but I also believe that the freedom, if you will, and good policy only happens when the people at large are educated in the issues and understand them. Because what we have right now in Lansing is a bubble, and the legislators go in and the big lobbies are there. And honestly, the state of Michigan is one of the biggest lobbies.
Mm-hmm.
The MDHHS has 16,000 employees.
Wow.
Or the full-time equivalent, I should say. And so until the legislators and the people out here are having the conversation and they each understand how legislation affects the real world, I don't think that we're going to have a sustainable, good policy system. So I do focus on education now. I put a lot of these issues out in the blog, on the website. There's somebody that came alongside yesterday, actually, and we're planning an education day. And so that might be an opportunity. If people want to sign up and get information about that, they can also do that on the website. Down at the footer, we have a newsletter sign up.
Awesome.
So it's just kind of feeling our way, growing, figuring out different ways of educating. And one of the things that we have coming up, I think will resonate with you. You're starting a LinkedIn place for nurses.
Yes.
I want to grow the conversation between the public and healthcare and policymakers. So hopefully within the next week or two, we will be launching a community forum on our website.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah.
Because over the years, it's been 10 years since we started our Facebook group, and that grew to 2,800 during COVID. Wow. And just Michigan, and we're very careful about screening the bots because Facebook is crazy enough without that. But I want to build it on our own turf, so we don't have to worry about the censorship that goes on the big media. So that's one of our goals for this year, to really get a lot of people signed up there and grow the conversation, grow understanding, because I just see a greater and greater split between policymakers and people, and between the healthcare, the bedside people and the patients. That estrangement is just not good.
There's a gap in it's kind of that thought. You almost deceive yourself as you get further and further disconnected. Is there some bad intention potentially mixed in? Sure, but a lot of people just become naive to the fact of what actually is needed to correct these problems because they've been so disconnected from them, individuals and clinicians combined. And so bringing together, I think, the knowledge, understanding from that core issue and understanding what's truly the problem here versus trying to put, a lot of what is typically flashy, which are Band-Aid style solutions. They get the attention and they have the big numbers, but we go back 2, 3, 4 years later and we're dealt the exact same issue, if not worse than what it originally was. So I love bringing everyone together in those environments to have that shared conversation, to hear at the ground level what is the true issue.
Yeah. And it was I think our whole culture has been gradually moving more and more toward intolerance. That really came out during the stresses and pressures of COVID, with healthcare becoming so politicized that there were dual narratives, and each side of politics kind of took a narrative, and the truth of healthcare wasn't in either camp. I saw so many lies from both sides. I just want to rip my hair out.
Yep.
You know, I may identify as from one end of the political spectrum, but I don't want either side using healthcare as a political football, because we all lose.
Correct.
Yeah. So I stand opposed to that. I want to bring people to the turf of what are the actual facts and the truths of it, and just please leave the politics at the door.
Yes. Yeah, there's definitely, benefits to collaboration, but then there's also that line that gets crossed, and it got crossed significantly.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. You were talking about, the biologics and how those, were lobbied for on the state level. It's something that I don't think bedside nurses really realize a lot, as I'm having conversations too, is, you're working within that environment and you're just giving a med and you're just doing a task, and you're not really understanding the business and the economics behind some of these very significant industry movements. How does a nurse get more in tune then with some of that behind the doors, behind the curtain conversation, things that you see? How are they going to understand that as they're practicing in the hospitals? How do they get that information?
Yeah, I have two paths in, if you will. One of the recent blog posts, I did one about the Michigan House, and I included links to where you could see bills, where you could understand who's on the committee, and follow up on succeeding agendas, and see, because you can watch live online when they have a committee hearing on a bill. And the way that I testified in the past is I would watch those as they came, and when they always have 2 hearings on each bill.
Okay.
So when you get the agenda, and they're supposed to put that out 3 days ahead at least of the meeting, you can look up the bill. You can see, this one concerns me in my practice, and I have knowledge, I have an opinion about this, whether this should go through or not.
Yep.
So that's one way. Check out the blog post. There's one for the House and one for the Senate.
Okay.
And kind of get your feet wet and know where the information can be found and how to follow up. There is also, for the political amongst us, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. Yeah, there
we go. A little bit. Yep.
Okay.
2022 legislative report card.
Yes. Each term in the Michigan House is 2 years long. And every 2 years there's an election. And so that's the political accountability loop that is supposed to keep legislators close to the people and having the conversations, doing the door-to-door, staying in touch. And this healthcare, most lobbies bring a list of talking points so that legislators can go straight from voting for that bill to communicating it to their constituents. I helped healthcare because we did this. If it were only true. It's a dual narrative. The real policy is understood usually in Lansing, to some degree at least, but what makes the headlines and what makes the conversations in the district are not the really facts. They're sort of a castle in the air. You know, it's wishful thinking sometimes, and sometimes it's just blatant giving a big favor to industry. So what I did with all of the legislative bills from when they got into office January of 2021 through May of last year, so what, 15, 16 months worth, that was 140 bill votes just related to health policy.
Wow.
And I went through and I scored them based on, do they serve the broad interests of the people, or do they serve a special interest somewhere? And the scores were not 100% wonderful. They were kind of where I expected them to be, but it's awful for people seeing it the first time, because I don't think any of them would be a passing score in any classroom.
Yeah.
I gave each of them a percent score based on that. It's an impartial system. I don't even look at names. I don't look at bill sponsors. I just look at the issue. And that whole spreadsheet of scores is available as a download on the website. So
Okay.
you can see how the legislator for their district voted last year. And there's a short list for the Senate because that's a smaller body. And then the rest of it is about the House. So
Okay.
everybody's in there, both legislators for every Michigan citizen. And right now I am partway through the rest. I finished scoring the rest of the term. So all the way from May through December of last year, so that we can come up with a final complete score. And people constantly ask, but how do I know which bills?
Yeah.
So my next publication is actually going to be a book. I've, I've gotten through all of the scoring, and I've categorized every bill according to whether it is a direct impact on MDHHS or part of the healthcare industry or the licensure piece. We haven't even talked about that yet.
Yeah.
It's growing far beyond what it was when any of us got our initial license. There are more and more parts of healthcare being licensed, and it's not a good thing. It disseminates responsibility, and when everyone is responsible for something, nobody gets it done.
Yep. Exactly. No accountability.
Yeah. So that's I'm working on. It's just pulling it all together and trying to make it brief but clear, because I don't want it to be a tome. I want it to be a workbook. I'm going to have blanks for people. I'll have bill numbers that they can look up from the last term and a brief description and a line for them to draw, because a lot of these bills come back every term. And so there's a line for them to fill in. What is the bill number this year?
Well, okay. No, it's fantastic work. I mean, somebody's got to do it, and I'm glad it's you doing it, not me, not my forte. But it's extremely needed, and I think, like you said, if nobody's there advocating, there's going to be a lot of wrong voices in these legislators' ears that is steering them in the wrong direction. So the advocacy component is extremely, extremely important. So thank you very much for doing that on behalf of myself and nurses across the state of Michigan as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we're getting close to time. I know we could talk forever on these topics and many things that we haven't addressed, but I want people to be able to connect with you or learn more about what you're providing for our nursing community and our state at large. How do they get connected with you?
2 ways. Number one, go to the website, mihealthfreedom.org, and scroll down to the bottom and you can sign up for a newsletter. When you do that, you get from my email, you can just hit reply. And that will be in touch. That goes to my inbox. Don't use the sender email, just by the way. We have one that we just use as the newsletter sender, but if you reply to the newsletter, then you'll be on my email. That's one way to reach out. You can also just email me directly if you choose. It's policyrnabby, ABBY, @gmail.com. And I'm always glad to hear from people, their perspective on issues. And of course, with the blog posts on the website, you can leave comments. I've actually had people reach out to me that way too. And the downloads, there's a button on the website called Get the Score. And that you insert an email, it brings you to our library of free resources. It gives you the download spreadsheet of all the health policy scores of the legislators. You can also get the one from 2020. So you can compare, did the same legislator improve or regress? And we plan to continue that every couple of years. If anyone would like to support our efforts, there is a button for support the cause on there. And we're a nonprofit. We appreciate any and all donations. And once you connect by the website and to the newsletter, you'll get kind of what our latest ventures are, opportunities, if there's speaking engagements, that sort of thing. So
Awesome. Very good. Now we'll include some of those links in the comments after we get the podcast up and upload it to our system. So thank you very much again, Abigail. It's been very informative. I know, again, you are a wealth of knowledge and could talk on these things for hours. And so I highly encourage individuals to connect with you to learn more and to potentially help your efforts on the advocacy side. So
wonderful. Thank you so much, Nate. I appreciate your work.
thank you again. All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Nurses Saving Nurses. Follow us to hear more exciting content and innovation occurring in the nursing world.